welcome back to Biblical Greek Made Easy. This is Class 4 of Module 1, and today we're going to take another step forward, giving you some of the tools and some of the finer points of grammar that you need to read and translate the New Testament in its original language, Koine Greek. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to get right to the tip of the day today. So I've been working in the addiction community for well over a decade, and one of the things we say in addiction communities is the saying, keep coming back. When you're in the addiction world, when you're recovering from addiction, that's so important. You got to just keep coming back. You can't give up. You can't quit. You can't throw in the towel. You got to keep coming back. You got to make a little bit of progress every day. Sometimes they're going to be bigger than others. There's going to be frustrations, but through it all, you got to keep coming back. And that's the tip of the day for you today. I want you to keep coming back. I want you to keep giving yourself to learning Greek. And there's going to be some hard lessons. There's going to be some easier lessons. But I want to encourage you through that whole thing, keep coming back. Don't quit. Keep going. This may be new for you. You may be using parts of your brain that you feel like you've never used before. It may seem weird and strange, but keep coming back and you're going to get this and it's going to be worth it in the end. Okay, so previously we've talked about this idea of the Greek staircase. You're coming off these two lessons where we learned all four of the noun cases in Greek. And this is really important because it lays the foundation of the Greek system, and how we understand how Greek works is through these cases where the words are going to change their form to tell us their function in the sentence. It's not about word order like it is in English. Instead, it's going to be about these cases telling us their function in the sentence. And so I've told you previously that there's going to be some lessons that feel like really big steps on this Greek staircase, okay? That it's uneven and you just feel like it's everything you can do to make that step. I feel like the last two lessons were kind of like that. The good news is I feel like this is a smaller step. This is an easier lesson. We take a little bit of a breath. Now that doesn't mean it's unimportant. There's going to be like 3 small things that you learn today rather than a couple big things. You learn 3 smaller things, but don't neglect those. Those are going to be really important when you come to read and translate the New Testament. You're going to need to know these, okay? So let me encourage you with that. And with that, let's get started. Today we're going to talk about prepositions, okay? Why do those matter? Because prepositions are word connectors. Okay? They're going to connect words and sentences, and they're going to help us do the kind of things we need to do to build more complex sentences in Greek. We're also going to learn me, which is the first verb we're going to learn. Now, we don't learn verbs until Module 2. This is sort of an exception. We give you this one small verb that's so common that shows up all over the place because it's going to help us build more sentences and it's going to help us learn some of these elements of grammar. So, me is what we call the to be verb. It means I am, you are, he, she, it is, etc. The to be verb is foundational to any language. And so we learn that pretty early. So let's talk about prepositions. So prepositions are small words in the English language and in the Greek language, and they're going to indicate the relationship between two words. Prepositions indicate the relationship between two words. So let me give you a couple of fun examples here. So the ball of cheese was on the Wookiee, or Antipas was alongside the left-handed gnomes, okay? Now, we could choose all sorts of boring sentences, like the boy threw the ball, that sort of thing. I think fun sentences are a little bit better, so that's why I've chosen some of these. But you see here in our fun sentences that on, that's underlined there in the first sentence, on the Wookiee, it's connecting this idea of the cheese and the Wookiee and telling us how they relate to each other, okay? Notice it's indicating that relationship. These are those word connectors. It's connecting those ideas. In the second sentence, notice alongside, that happens to be a little bit longer word, kind of long for a preposition, but it's telling us something about how Antipas is relating to the left-handed gnomes. Okay? Once again, some fun sentences to keep things alive. Now, let me show you this diagram here. If you're more of a visual learner, this might be helpful for you. This is from the Mounts Basics of Biblical Greek Grammar textbook on page 75. You can find it there. But you're going to learn a handful, a good number of prepositions in Greek this chapter for your vocabulary words. And Mounts has put them in this helpful diagram for us here. So you can sort of infer what the meaning is for each of these words words by looking at it and seeing how it's related to the diagram. So on the left there, pros, it means to or toward, and you see that pros in the diagram is moving toward the circle. If you go inside the circle, you see n in there, and n is going to mean in, on, or among, and notice that it's in the circle, okay? Going down to the left there a little bit, ace is going to mean into, and notice how the arrow next to ace shows it going into the circle, okay, etc. And we could keep talking through some of these. Down at the bottom, hupa, for example, means under. Maybe using this diagram will be helpful for you in memorizing some of these words. Students sometimes struggle with prepositions because they're so short. Sometimes they look like each other. Sometimes they look like other words. And I tease my students sometimes that we're going to have a quiz or a test, and it's going to be all vocabulary, but it's only going to be prepositions. I'm just going to give them all prepositions. They all scream and go, no, you know, that sort of thing, just to kind of have fun. The other thing about prepositions that students a lot of times don't like is prepositions are flexible. So each of these ones that I told you, pros and ace and in and hupa and those, they all play a range of definitions. So one Greek word might represent 3 or 4 different English words based on how it's being used. And students tend not to like that because that makes that vocabulary a little bit more challenging, okay? So I just want to tell you that right up front. So in Greek, there's going to be some prepositions that change their meaning based on the case of the word that immediately follows it. Okay? So I want to give you an example here. This is a Greek sentence. I'll read it for you and we'll translate this together. So, kai elegin autois ta sabaton dia ton anthropon egeneta kai uk ha anthropos dia ta sabaton. So that first little bit, kai elegin autois, and he was saying to them, colon, you only know kai in that first little bit, but that colon there, ta sabaton dia ton anthropon egeneta. So egeneta is our verb. Ta sabaton is going to be our subject. The Sabbath is what that means. And then we get to dia. That's our first of our prepositions. Now, dia is one of those words, like a couple others, that is going to change its meaning, change how we translate it into English based on the case of the word that follows it. So we're going to look at this. Dia ton anthropon is the phrase. Ton anthropon, we can take that as a unit. That's a noun with a definite article and then a noun attached to it. And of course, those are going to agree in case, gender, number. And so what is the case of that word? We can either look at the definite article or the noun itself, whichever's easier. I suggest you look at the definite article and you see that that case is accusative. That is correct. So if dia is with the accusative, it's going to mean on account of. Okay? So that's how we're going to translate it here. The Sabbath was made, egeneta is was made. The Sabbath was made on account of man, on account of humanity. Kai uk ha anthropos dia ta sabaton. Kai and uk is not, and not ha anthropos, humanity, dia ta sabaton, on account of the Sabbath. Okay? Now in English translations, we might clean that up a little bit and say the Sabbath was made for humanity, not humanity for the Sabbath. But here, dia, we're taking is on account of, essentially the same thing in this case as for. But on account of is how we translate dia with the accusative. Let me show you another example. Tuta de halan geganen hena plerothe ta hrethen hupa kuriu dia tu prophetu legantas. Okay, here we go. So tuta de halan geganen, that little part means, and all of this happened. And then we have hina, which means in order that. And then we have our verb plerothe ta hrethen hupa kuriu. Okay, let's talk about that first preposition we get to there, hupa. Hupa is going to change its meaning. If it's with the accusative, it's going to mean under. If it's with the genitive, it's going to mean by. So let's look at the word right after that. In this case, it's curry. We don't have a definite article to help us this time. But what case is curry? That's right, it's a genitive. So hupa, when it's followed by a genitive, is going to be translated as by. So that phrase there, ta hrathan hupa curry, the word by the Lord, or we would probably clean that up to say the word of the Lord. It's sort of assuming the word spoken by the Lord. And then we have dia tu prophetu legantis. Dia tu prophetu, we have that dia in there, which is another preposition. And so we're going to look at the case of the word that comes after it. In this case, it's to. What case is that? Also genitive, very good. So up above, remember, we saw that dia with the accusative meant on account of. Dia with the genitive is going to mean through. Notice that those words mean fairly significantly different things there. Through versus on account of. Here it's going to be through, okay? So, and this all happened in order that the word of the Lord through the prophet may be fulfilled, saying, and then we see the colon there because in this case the gospel writer Matthew is going to quote that prophecy that they're talking about here. But notice what we did. Hupa is one of those words that changes its meaning based on what comes after it, one of those prepositions that changes its meaning based on what comes after it. Dia is also one of those. Those are the only two you know so far. Now, while different prepositions will oftentimes have ranges of meanings that are going to change based on the context of the word, we may have to massage those meanings a little bit. There's 4 of them that you have on your vocabulary list for this week that specifically change their meaning based on the case that follows them. And those 4 are dia, meta, para, and hupa. Those are the 4 that you need to remember change their meaning based on the case that follows them. So you need to remember both of those meanings and the case that goes with it. So I would suggest either using or making different vocabulary cards for those different meanings of those words. We just have to learn those together, okay? And again, prepositions generally have a range of meaning, and that's one of the reasons they're frustrating, but remember all of the options for each one, and the sentence will, for the most part, give you hints and tell you which one to use. We're going to choose the word that makes the most sense in English based on the context we have there in the Greek. Okay, let's switch to the to be verb. This is the first verb you're learning in Biblical Greek Made Easy. And we don't actually talk about verbs. We don't learn the full slate of verbs until we get to Module 2. Module 2 is all about the Greek verbal system, and we'll go really deep there. But here early on, I want to teach you the me verb, which is the to be verb in Greek. It's the most basic verb in any language, the to be verb is. And for that reason, it's weird. What do I mean by weird? Well, these verbs in any language that get used a whole lot, they're going to conjugate in weird ways, just through overusage or familiarity, or for whatever reason, they sort of morph into these weird forms. So let me show you for an example. Here is the paradigm. Don't be scared of that word paradigm, but here's the paradigm or the conjugation of the English word, the to be verb in English. in the present. So first person singular is I am. Second person singular is you are. Notice that from first person to second person singular, we've already changed the verb. It goes from am to are. It's a different form. And then third person singular is he, she, it is. Okay, he is, she is, it is. Notice we now have a third word, am, are, and is. They're all conjugations of this to be verb, but notice it's using different words to conjugate these, right? It's weird. Think about that. Think about a different word like run. I run, you run, he, she, it runs. Essentially, it's the same word. We had an S for that third person singular, but it's the same word. Here in the to be verb in English, we just have lots of variety. Notice first person plural there. We are, you are, second person plural, and they are. So there we get quite a bit of regularity, but still, we have 4 different forms for that present tense paradigm in English. Okay, so let me show you the Greek. Luckily, there's less variation, but it is still weird. It's going to have some variation. It's not going to follow all of the rules that normal Greek verbs will follow. And so notice here, first person singular is a me. That means I am. Second person singular is a, means you are. That's singular. Greek, like every other language in the history of the world, except for English, is going to differentiate between you singular and you plural. That's really important. We want to make sure that we get that. Okay? Third person singular is Estin. This is the version that's going to show up most in the New Testament. Estin is going to be he, she, it is. First person plural is esmen, which means we are. Second person plural is este, which means you, plural, you are, or y'all are, my students like to say. And then third person plural is asen, which means they are. Okay, so this is your first paradigm. With these 6 forms, there's lots of sentences we can create. Anything with the words you see there, I am, you are, he, she, it is, creates a lot of ability for us to create sentences. So I would suggest that you make 6 flashcards, 1 for each of these, and that's going to help you learn this. Again, Estin is going to show up a lot, Amy a fair amount. The others will show up some too, but you need to know this verb because it's going to show up fairly regularly. Now, let's talk about one other wrinkle that goes along with Amy, and that's this idea of what we call a predicate nominative. Okay? So let me define these words for you a little bit. We know what a nominative is, right? Nominative is a case, the first of the cases that we learned, and it's the case that tells us what? What does nominative tell us? Right, it tells us that it's the subject of the sentence, okay? Now, a predicate, this is going back to probably some grade school English for you, maybe since you've heard that word. The predicate refers to the second half of a sentence, okay? There's the subject and there's the predicate, okay? So to call something a predicate nominative sounds almost backwards, doesn't it? Why would we have, if the nominative is the subject, then why is it later on in the sentence? Well, here's what we mean by that, okay? Take an English sentence like this. The teacher is I. The teacher is I. Now in English, that word I, which we just spell with a single letter I capitalized, that's a nominative. That's a nominative form. I would say, I teach the class, right? If we were going to make that the subject of a verb. But here, the teacher is I. It's kind of playing the role of the direct object. But notice, I is not really receiving the action of the verb. Notice we've talked earlier about sentences like Lily chased the ball. The ball is the direct object, and it's receiving the action. It's the Lily is doing the chasing to the ball, okay? But in a sentence like this, where the verb is, there's kind of not action being done to the direct object there, isn't it? The I isn't being ised. I know that sounds weird to say, right? But there's no action being perpetrated or being done to the I there. So in that sense, it's not actually a direct object. If our verb is going to be a to be verb, then where we would expect an accusative direct object, we're going to put a nominative there instead. Why? Again, because it's not really receiving the action. Instead, it's kind of standing in. Okay? So, in Greek, eimi, the to be verb, eimi, will take its direct object, and notice I put direct object in quotes there, because to call it a direct object is a bit of a misnomer. But where we would expect the direct object to be, it's going to take that in the nominative, and we call that a predicate nominative. Okay? It's not the subject of the sentence. Instead, it's a nominative that shows up with a to be verb, and it's sort of doing the work of the direct object, but it's not a direct object, it's a predicate nominative. So let me show you an example of this. Here's a classic sentence, theos ein halagos. This shows up in John chapter 1. Theos ein halagos. You know a couple of these words. Theos means God, good. Ein is actually the third person singular of that eimi verb, but this is past tense. You don't know this form yet. We're just learning the present tense, but I'll tell you that this is the third person imperfect form, past tense form of eimi. Okay? So theos ein, God was, and then we have ha logos, the word. Okay? God was the word. Could also be the word was God, couldn't it? Why? Because that verb was could also be is, if it was present tense, is kind of like an equal sign, isn't it? It kind of shows up and is equating these two things. The word was God, God was the word. Those things are being equated. So we could essentially flip those around without changing anything. And that's kind of the essence of why we have these predicate nominatives. So notice theos is in the nominative. And logos is in the nominative as well, okay? And so we have two nominatives, and one of those is going to be the subject, and one is going to be the predicate nominative. Now, how do we determine which one? That is a Module 3 discussion when we get into syntax, so I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. This is maybe a little bit of a confusing example because really it could be either way. We translate this in the Bible, the word was God, and we mostly do that because logos has a definite article with it. That's kind of the Cliff Notes version. We're going to bring that to the front and say the word was God. But honestly, those are pretty equivalent kind of statements. God was the word was God. So things to remember, the predicate nominative is going to be really important, okay? It's taking that nominative case that we're thinking subject, but if it's with a to be verb, then it's doing this other role as a predicate nominative. It's not going to take its direct object in the accusative. Instead, it's going to take a predicate nominative. Now, you only know one to be verb right now, which is eimi. That's by far the most common. There's one other that's pretty common, and then another one that's less common that we'll learn later on. But don't worry about that too much right now. Just worry about eimi. Memorize those 6 forms that are on here, and just remember this little wrinkle of a predicate nominative. You'll need to see this a few times before you get the hang of it. So let's review. Today we talked about prepositions, those word connectors that help us show how two words are related to each other. And we learned a bunch of those in Greek for the vocabulary this week. We found out that 4 of them on our vocabulary list actually change their meaning based on the case of the word that follows them. So it's a reminder that case doesn't go away. We just have to know it. It affects everything else. And so get busy learning those prepositions and how they relate to each other and how they relate to the cases around them. We also learned the first verb in this course, which is eimi. It's our to be verb. It means I am. And do notice there that we always give you the first person singular form of the verb as what we call the lexical form. Lexical form is, if you would look it up in a Greek lexicon, a Greek dictionary, it would be in that form, eimi. So you learned the 6 forms of that. I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, you all are, or they are. You learned those 6 different forms. Make flashcards for those. And then finally, we talked about the predicate nominative. which is a nominative that shows up with a to-be verb where we would expect an accusative direct object. But since it doesn't take a direct object because it's a to-be verb, instead it takes a predicate nominative. So spend some time reviewing those three things. As I said, it's three smaller things today rather than several big things. We're not learning new cases. We're just learning kind of wrinkles to the way those cases work. We're learning a verb, that sort of thing. Guys, I'm excited for you. Keep practicing. Check out the handouts. Check out the practices. Take the quiz, and we'll see you next time.